Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's online session on clean hydrogen in the Midwest, America's next H2 hotspot. Welcome. Today we'll have four experts tell us all about what's going on in the Midwest with regards to clean hydrogen. Before we start, actually, I would like to just remind you of a couple of things. First, I'd like to encourage you to introduce yourselves using the chat uh, function that you see at the bottom of your screen. The other thing I would like to remind you of is that we are recording this session. So you will get an email with a link to the recording and the slides in a few days' time. Finally, I'd like also to remind you that you can send questions. But when you do send your questions, do so using the Q&A function that you see on your Zoom toolbar. So I think that, that's it for housekeeping. Now, before we start with the presentations, I would like to ask the speakers to introduce themselves briefly. So let's start with Charlie Kelley from 174 Power Global. So uh, Charlie, over to you for the intro.
Good morning. As Carla said, my name is Charlie Kelley. I'm a manager of green hydrogen business development for 174 Power Global. If you're not familiar with our company, we're solar and battery storage developers, and we're adding green hydrogen to our portfolio, which is really exciting. Our first projects are producing hydrogen through electrolysis and powered by behind-the-meter renewables. So part of my job is taking a look at different regions of the country, so I'm excited to share with you today what I've learned about the Midwest. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie, and welcome to today's webinar. And next, I would like to ask Will Hollo from Pattern to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. Will Hollo, Pattern Energy. I'm a project developer of all sorts of renewable energy projects throughout North America. I do a lot of work in Canada as well as the US. And we have, in the last couple of years, built out a green hydrogen and derivatives team. And I've been focusing on the Midwest. So pleased to be here today and share some of my learnings.
Thank you, Will. Next, I would like to ask Gordon Baier to please introduce himself.
Hello, I'm Gordon Baier with Go Solar Energy, and I'm the CEO and project manager of green hydrogen projects in the Midwest. And we are an early stage developer for such projects. It started 5 years ago in this site selection.
Thank you, Gordon. And to close off the round of introductions, I'd like to ask Ian Champ to introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, Carlos. Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Champ. I'm the Midwest Regional Hubs Manager with Clean Air Task Force. If you've never heard of us before, we're an international nonprofit focusing on a bunch of different program areas. I focus on our zero carbon fuels team, which is where hydrogen comes in, as well as our carbon management team. And I'm specifically focused on the Midwest region, so happy to be here.
Great, thank you, Ian. So, right, so now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll leave the floor to Charlie Kelley, who will deliver the first presentation. So, there you go. I think it's on full screen. Yeah, it's on full screen. I can see it. So, Charlie, over to you.
Okay, great. I'm happy to get us started. So as I mentioned, part of my job as a business developer is to look at different regions of the United States and see where we might want to put projects. So taking a look at the Midwest, I have to agree with the title. I do think it's the next hydrogen hotspot for a variety of reasons. But most importantly, it's got tons of resources that we need to develop the hydrogen market. And it's, of course, ideally located between East and West Coast efforts. So not only can we connect up as a country, but we can, ensure the decarbonization that we're seeking. Next slide, please. So let's talk about those resources for just a minute. As you can see, when you're doing a project, I'm sure you've got a sort of checklist of the type of things that you want: power, water, and of course, customers. So first of all, you have government support in the Midwest, right? You have 2 hydrogen hubs awarded, and that brings credibility and of course, financial support for projects, which helps the area blossom and grow. Of course, that's the whole point of the hubs. And we're going to discuss the hubs a little bit briefly in just a minute, but I wanted to move on and talk about some of the other nice advantages in the Midwest. So as you can see from the NREL map that I have on the screen, you've got an abundance of solar and wind energy. In addition to that, the green area shows where you have solar and wind. And of course, as a green hydrogen electrolytic developer, that is music to my ears. If I can get power during the day and I have an opportunity to resource at night, that's excellent. And of course, that enables grids to continue to add renewable resources for overall power production. I'm also excited by the existing ammonia pipeline. So if you take a look at the bottom right-hand corner of the slide, you can see that we already have ammonia pipelines, which can help transport clean ammonia for export off-takers. And it also can help move around clean ammonia to farmers in the Midwest themselves for use to make clean fertilizer. And when I'm looking at a project, I'm also looking at power. So the fact that we're in the MISO region, while all of the RTOs have their challenges, MISO has been commended for having a good long-term plan for adding renewables to their interconnection, and then just a reputation for being very reliable. So I think of that as a plus. We've also got abundant water, apparently underground storage for carbon sequestration, and of course, key rail, air, and hydrogen corridors. And to not only move fuel around, but to decarbonize as these areas are difficult to electrify. But most importantly, and most excitingly for most people, we have customers. So there is an amazing group of potential customers that are in hard to decarbonize sectors that can electrify to decarbonize. We're talking about industry, steel, glass, refining. We've got transportation, as I mentioned. We have power production, agricultural demand, and ports, and of course, aviation. Next slide, please. So let's just briefly highlight, so that will help set a map for the rest of the discussion today about the hydrogen hubs, because that is super important to the region. So you have the MAC H2 hub, as you can see, which is primarily Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan, but there are projects slated for other states in the region. We don't know exactly all of the projects that will be supported with this funding. We know there's 9 projects in general, but there's limited information right now as they're going through negotiations. We know there's going to be clean hydrogen produced from nuclear, clean hydrogen to support mobility centers that already exist, clean hydrogen to support industry, steel and refining in Indiana. And one of the ones I think is kind of cool is clean hydrogen to decarbonize the Port of Detroit. So similar to a coastal port, they've got drayage, they've got handling equipment, marine vessels and shore power that they need. So I think that's very exciting. And this hydrogen hub will also support building stations in the hydrogen corridors and producing fuel for hydrogen-powered vehicles and equipment. So just briefly moving on to the Heartland Hydrogen Hub, the nice thing about this hub is they have 3 identified projects, as you can see from the map on your screen. We've got clean hydrogen production in Minnesota. Xcel is going to be producing clean hydrogen from nuclear and renewables. Xcel also has a wind to ammonia project in South Dakota. They're going to be using hydrogen to produce using renewables to produce hydrogen and ammonia for fertilizer. And then finally, you've got the Prairie Horizon H2, and this is a Marathon Oil and TC Energy project where they're going to be producing blue and green hydrogen and ammonia, and they intend to use carbon capture and sequestration. And there's some talk of a carbon pipeline to move that carbon to other locations, which would be ideal for sequestration. Next slide, please. And finally, let's talk for a minute about the state and what we've got with hydrogen incentives and policy, because we all have a pretty good idea of what's going on at the federal level, what you want to see in a region as you want to see states moving forward to embrace this industry as well. And I think you can see that in the Midwest. First of all, as you can see, in 2007, the Midwestern Governors Association was recommending that the Midwest adopt a low carbon fuel policy. This was largely to include ethanol in blending into fuel to reduce carbon intensity, but now is also something that would be beneficial for clean hydrogen. So in 2023, Illinois, Minnesota, and Michigan all introduced bills to propose that there be a low carbon fuel standard and a credit market similar to what we see in California. Unfortunately, those bills have stalled. They're not necessarily out of play, and all 3 states are in a 2023-2024 legislative session. So it's possible they can be revived, but they really are just kind of stalled in committee right now. However, Minnesota moved forward with a clean transportation working group. And in that working group, they're making recommendations for that standard, as you can see on the bottom of the slide. So just in case you're not familiar with a low carbon fuel standard, similar to what we have in California, these bills, if they passed, would set a low carbon standard for fuels. So if you're producing fuel and your carbon intensity is too high, you're going to need to purchase carbon credits to get in line with the standard, the legal standard. And if you're below the standard, you can make revenue by selling credits. That's it in a nutshell. Obviously, different programs have different nuances, but that's basically what you're looking at. And so these states in the Midwest that are so key to so much of the hydrogen demand are looking to establish that and potentially bring another revenue source in for hydrogen production. Most states have, you can see to the right, I'm not going to go into this at length, and you'll get these slides after the presentation, so you'll have them, but most states are also looking at grants for vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles, and the heavy and medium duty arena. You've got renewable portfolio standards or clean energy targets that are being knocked around the legislative bodies. You've got alt fuel tax exempts. And, one thing that Ian's going to talk about more about, but you're seeing permitting and safety come online and trying to make a nicer market for the overall development. So that's all I had for you today in our short amount of time, but thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to hearing the other presentations.
Thank you, Charlie, for your presentation. That was very interesting. So we already have one question on the Q&A box, and I encourage the viewers to send more questions. We'll get to them after all the presentations. So next, I'd like to welcome Ian Champ to give his presentation. So whenever you're ready, Ian, start sharing your screen. Okay, I can see it on full screen. So over to you, Ian.
All right, thank you. And I promise I won't talk too quickly. My slides have far fewer fun pictures than Charlie's did. So I broke the rule from college, and they're very text heavy because I'm covering a very fun topic of permitting. A lot of the work that I'm focused on now is looking at what's next. So we've got independent hydrogen developers moving forward. We also have the Hydrogen Hubs program that's in negotiations right now, but the step that comes next is basically project development. And one of the biggest things that we've heard over and over again, and if you've ever worked on a project before trying to put steel on the ground, you know, permitting comes up, permitting can slow you down, all of that. So I'm going to give a brief overview of kind of the laws and oversight that goes into hydrogen project permitting, and then kind of highlighting some of the areas that we see as either barriers and opportunities coming up. So at the most basic level, I'm going to start with the most fun thing, federal law. So one of the cornerstones of basically moving hydrogen around is kind of counterintuitively the Natural Gas Act of 1938. Again, a lot of text on this slide, but basically the Natural Gas Act defines natural gas as either unmixed or a mixture of natural and artificial gases. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is designated under the Natural Gas Act as the overseer of all of the interstate pipeline system for gas, has basically treated hydrogen blended with natural gas as under its authority. Well, we remain to see whether FERC will then intuit that pure hydrogen falls under its existing authority. CATF's opinion is that it would probably require an act of Congress to actually give FERC that authority, but we'll see how it goes. And one final note here is just, this is FERC's authority only covers interstate pipelines. Any intrastate pipelines are completely controlled by the state. So as we move forward, again, apologies for the text heaviness, but the two main federal oversight commissions that you need to keep in mind for all of this permitting and safety considerations are FERC, already mentioned, and then the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA. Kind of already covered FERC, but basically the one thing that I wanted to call out here amidst all of this text is basically there is a requirement that FERC not discriminate against any customers, and once a pipeline is developed. And one of the things that we're thinking through is, what does that mean basically for if we've got a trunk line that then has different carbon intensities of hydrogen that are feeding into that line? It's just kind of a thing that we're starting to play around with and consider, what does that mean for end customers? Is there a certification program that's in place? Not that we know of right now, that can then, basically act as a REC or an energy attribution credit that can certify that a customer has purchased the product that they want. Kind of building off what Charlie said for safety, PHMSA is the prime safety, enforcer at the federal level. They generate and oversee the safety regulations for flammable gases and have traditionally considered hydrogen to fall under that framework, which is appropriate. That said, they have not to date adopted any hydrogen-specific regulations, but they are funding multiple research projects, and we'll see what comes out of that. Our assumption is that they will likely continue to operate or regulate hydrogen pipelines using existing natural gas regulations. We can discuss whether that's appropriate or not, but that's the framework that is currently in place. And so for all permitting considerations, for all safety considerations, that's kind of the lens that we're using right now. And then with that baseline there, now I've got a far less text-heavy slide. Basically, we go into state and local oversight. I very much, glossed over, kind of simplified it a lot here, but broadly, state and local control falls into the actual permitting and the actual zoning considerations. So for zoning, what are appropriate setbacks for hydrogen transportation or hydrogen storage infrastructure? Under permitting, the interesting thing that we think we see here is, for a standard hydrogen operation, most of the permitting is pretty cut and dry. It's established. Water permits, wastewater permits, basically all of your industrial size permits. The one nuance there is what on-site storage permitting looks like. Again, like Charlie mentioned, a couple of states are moving forward with state-specific permitting regulations. I personally live in Illinois, and I know that the State House is considering that. but we'll see how those shake out and what they look like, whether they're different for subsurface versus above ground, likely will be, and then what the safety requirements around those will be. I guess I do want to note there, as a bit of a tangent on permitting, industry has worked with hydrogen for decades now, so there are safety considerations that do need to be taken into account. It is a flammable gas, but it's not wholly unknown, I would say. So long as the appropriate engineering and administrative controls are in place, it is used widely, or I shouldn't say widely, but it's used extensively by certain industries, so it's well known. And then the last thing I'll say under zoning, I kind of ham-handedly put it into zoning, but the use of existing right-of-ways, there's a decent amount of discussion around converting old natural gas infrastructure, either distribution or transportation lines, into hydrogen. It's doable, and it is certainly appealing from a land use perspective. If we have an existing right-of-way, if we can convert what's there to carry this new product, that's definitely appealing. The land is basically already set aside for this infrastructure, and you don't necessarily need to go through as strenuous of a public review for potentially eminent domain concerns and things like that. And then the last thing I guess I'll throw out there is just around what these, we've heard a lot of talk, especially around the hubs, about their distribution models. We'll see how these unfold, and I think that'll really drive a lot of the permitting discussions and considerations that are coming in the next few years. Assuming, again, using the hubs as an example, assuming the DOE negotiations conclude this year, within the next 2 years, they should be moving forward. Each of the hubs and each of their projects should be moving forward into their permitting phase. So that'll go through. There's no fast track right now for the hubs. As soon as they make it through negotiation, each of their projects will have to progress just like it's a standalone project. It needs its own permits. It needs to move forward on its own. It will need to go through National Environmental Policy Act review. It'll need to go through local reviews, things like that. So it's not to say that these considerations are not, big. They are, and they will take years to work through, especially, again, as Charlie mentioned, any of the projects using carbon management that brings in EPA Class 6 wells. Right now, the EPA has a goal of issuing those permits within 2 years, and we're seeing how well they're able to maintain that timeline in real time. So we'll see what that actually turns out to look like. And I think I already said this, but the last thing I'll throw out there is, again, just we'll see what their distribution models look like. We've heard consistently from both, again, hubs and non-hubs producers that there's all of this funding there to stand up the production side, and that's needed, and that's great. Now we need incentive. There needs to be demand to drive production. So as that ramps up, we'll see what the distribution models look like, again, impacting permitting. We've heard from a couple developers just different models, whether they're going to transport the raw materials and then do on-site electrolysis, or autothermal or steam methane reformation on site to generate their hydrogen, or do they have a large centralized production facility and then, kind of like what I've been talking about throughout my entire section, permitting and then building a large scale hydrogen pipeline to move it to large end users. We're starting to look through that now, because there's so much kind of up in the air about who's doing what and who's going to be the first movers, how quickly the offtake is going to be. There's a lot of unknowns. So it's just an interesting thing to think through. So that'll cover my portion, and then I'll briefly just put up my contact information if anyone would like to get in touch. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Ian, for your presentation. And I think, well, permitting is it's one of those things, right? That is essential. So thank you for covering it. So now I would like to welcome Will to give his presentation. So Will, whenever you are ready, please start sharing your screen and you can begin.
Thank you,
And I
Carlos.
do have, there are a couple of questions in the Q&A box. Again, to everyone in the audience, please do send your questions. And yes, because I get this question a couple of times every webinar. We are recording the session, and you will get a link to the video recording and the presentation. Will, over to you. I can see your presentation perfectly.
Great. Thank you, Carlos. And thanks, Charlie and Ian. Fun for me to build off the permitting section because I spent a few years in federal permitting myself. So it is indeed a fun world to play in. I'm now in the project development space, which I enjoy as well. And we're going to focus on the Midwest today.
Would you mind speaking up a little bit, just a little bit louder?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure thing. Is that a little better?
Yeah. Speak up a little bit more, and then because I could hear you, but it was definitely at a lower level than Ian, for example. So
okay, I'll speak up a bit and just let me know if you can't hear me. So first things first, Pattern Energy, who we are, what we do in the space, and why we feel we have a role to play in the green hydrogen world. Pattern has about 6 gigawatts of installed renewable capacity around North America. I mentioned that's Canada and the United States. And that's predominantly wind energy, but also solar. And we're now spending time in transmission development, which we know is a constraint, green fuels, which we'll talk through today, as well as battery storage, standalone and co-located with our generation sites. 2 big successes I'd like to point to in the last couple of years. First, Western Spirit Wind was a 1,050 megawatt wind project commissioned in 2021 in New Mexico. We've built on that with SunZia Wind and Transmission in the last few years. We financed that project at the end of 2023. That's 3,500 megawatts of wind, 550 miles HVDC transmission line, delivering that wind into Arizona. Ultimately, it's going to make its way to California consumers. And so that was a real supply side focus. And what I mean by that is we found the windiest lands in New Mexico and devised a way to deliver that electricity to consumers. And that's what we like to do. And so why green fuels, why we think we fit in this space? It's because all of these projects need renewable electricity at a really big scale, which has been alluded to already. And we're proven at that big scale, and we like to play in North America, which we think is going to be a big part of the global hydrogen market that's emerging. Carlos, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine, yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah. So why the Midwest? This is really what we're here to talk about. Other speakers have touched on this. I mentioned we're taking a supply side focus. And what I mean by that is we're looking at the key inputs to produce cost competitive green hydrogen. And we're going to those places to site these projects. So first and foremost, the wind and sun in the Midwest are very strong. And I'm thinking in particular, the western side of this region. So Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas in particular. When you combine the wind and sun in those regions, we can get something like a 70% capacity factor on the renewable electricity, which is quite good. And the lower the cost of that electricity, the lower the cost of the hydrogen we can eventually sell to consumers, making it more competitive. Cost competitive of a low carbon hydrogen product is a legitimate question, and we believe that higher capacity factors help answer that. So the more renewable electricity we can provide around the clock in places that make sense for siting, the cheaper and more competitive that hydrogen can be. Another key is transmission constraints. You all are probably familiar with this if you play in the clean energy world. MISO and SPP are extremely congested, which means that some of the strongest renewables in the country can't make their way to market, and they're effectively trapped. Green hydrogen and derivatives give us another path to market, whether that's domestic fertilizer demand, or if we look to export angles, we would need to find a way to get that green hydrogen all the way to the coast, which is a challenge, would require pipelines like Ian alluded to. Another very key input, really the 2 key inputs for green hydrogen production are renewable electricity and water. And as we know, the Midwest, especially as we get closer to the Great Lakes region, has abundant water. And so I'm really a believer that we need to site these projects in water-rich areas so we don't exacerbate drought conditions in the Southwest, for example. Midwest makes a lot of sense. It kind of checks the key boxes for cost competitive hydrogen production. I'm also a believer that domestic market is going to emerge, in particular for green fertilizer, for which green ammonia is a key input. So if we can produce that with hydrogen, we're well on our way to a project that hopefully makes sense. Challenges ahead, man, there are many, and this is what a lot of the conversation is about, and it's fun to talk through it. I've touched on cost competitiveness. The state of play right now is that gray, which is based on natural gas, is simply cheaper than low carbon hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is arguably advantaged because the steam methane reformers, which make the gray hydrogen, already exist. Carbon capture needs to be added for that to be certifiably low carbon. But this is ultimately, until we get to cost parity, green hydrogen is going to have a hard time competing. And so these early mover projects are going to take on a lot of risk. And I touch on that on the following bullet. Paths to market. I've mentioned we're taking the supply side approach. We're looking for the places with the most cost competitive green hydrogen and derivatives, but those are not necessarily next to areas of demand, which means we then have to transport the product via pipelines or railways, and it can be challenging and expensive. So finding the perfect site for one of these projects is really difficult. Storing the hydrogen. Ian touched on this, but hydrogen is an explosive molecule. Its derivatives, like ammonia, are toxic, at least that one is. And these are not challenges we can't solve. Ian also mentioned that these are products, hydrogen and ammonia are products that are already stored and transported around the world today. So we have tools to manage those challenges, but they can't be ignored. And so that's a focus we're taking in development as well. And again, it's a siting issue. How do we find a place with strong resource, abundant water, and suitable geology if we're looking for underground storage to make for a cost competitive product? Financing these projects is a challenge because it's a new industry. The early movers are going to take a lot of risk. These have really high price tags on them because we're looking at renewables plus electrolyzers, sometimes ammonia synthesizers. Pipelines can be involved if we need to move the product. So it makes for very complex projects. Luckily, Pattern tends to like those projects, so it's fun to envision how we can plant new seeds for good greenfields projects in the Midwest. And I want to just touch on hourly matching as well. Final point here, this I really believe is a good component of the Inflation Reduction Act, and in particular how we qualify for production tax credits, because it sets a higher bar to qualify for those subsidies, and it importantly ensures that the green hydrogen won't have hidden carbon emissions. If we are going to take energy off of the grid to power our electrolyzers, there's a risk that, and actually it's a commonality, that the grid will have a carbon intensity to it. So how do we certify that our project is in fact green and our product is in fact green hydrogen? That's a big question. Hourly matching helps us get there, but it is a very high bar to meet. So it's a challenge. I think it's a good one, but the industry is going to need to rise to meet it. And that's all for me. I hope you could hear me okay. And if you want to get in touch, please feel free. Thank you everyone for the time. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Will, for your presentation. So you touched upon a number of interesting topics there, hourly matching and and so on, the three pillars. So
Yes.
we'll get to talk about some of those issues during the Q&A session, but now I'd like to give the floor to Gordon Baier to give his presentation.
Yeah, hello everyone. Gordon Baier with Go Solar Energy, and first and foremost, I would like to say all the points the previous presenters or speakers have touched on were actually what we have worked over the last several years on, and we know about what to look for. And exactly at this point, I would like to mention that years ago, to be precise, more than 5 years ago, we made a site selection or a specific analysis across the US where to put a circular business model that based on renewable energies and includes also decarbonization or direct delivery of industries and also neighboring coal power plant with the intent for replacement of the generation facilities. So with that saying, I would like to start my screen sharing and keep going ahead and hope that everybody can see it.
Yeah, I can see it on full screen, so please go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So first, also many thanks for REMET to having us here today. And we would like to share some information, what we did over the last couple of years to be right now spearheaded in the green hydrogen and green ammonia production. And specifically with our site selections we run an analysis across several locations where we have nowadays under development gigascale project from solar with battery buffer to green hydrogen, and as well as green ammonia to any other derivatives. So our initial project was really to look where would be an ideal location. And I totally have to agree with Charlie here along on her slide that the Midwest is ideally located because of several power production from wind and solar. They make an ideal location for hydrogen electrolysis. And what we did is we secured land surrounding on potential large-scale off-takers and with their future market needs. So we secured several thousand acres to build out around about 6.5 gigawatt of solar that can assure to produce up to 200,000 metric tons of green hydrogen per year. And with the intent neighboring to large industrial complexes or coal power plants to potentially supply them with the derivatives. And in this regard, hydrogen is one of the main commodities that these fertilizer plants, for example, are consuming to make their products. And that's why we secured these locations. In the next slide, our expansion of the project involved even furthermore that we said, okay, what else do we look into? And 2 years ago, we adapted already the potential carbon capture and as well ammonia production on site. And with the furthermore intention to refine these kind of hydrogen-based products into other already used products such as liquefied organic hydrogen carriers, such as methanol, ethanol, or other components. And with these site selections where we touched on infrastructure, such as railroad on site, infrastructure such as additional pipeline connections, what can we make a use out of it? And all these things had to cross on our site selections before we started the development. And these play a vital role, because if you can show an on-site circular business model that makes sense for the neighboring industries, for example, as well as you have the capability to transport your goods and products over a long distance, including with pipelines or other transportation methods, then you have a complete large-scale capacity for a project to be built in the near future. And I have to absolutely agree, for example, when Will said there's a lot of risk involved in early stage movers. And that's absolutely right, because you don't know how the market develops. And to be quite frank, 5 years ago, for sure, we had a vision, but more and more over the years, it came into play. And right now, with new rules and regulations over the IRA, how can we make this work is even more compelling, because we have right now on these projects exactly that, what the IRA is looking for to grant for the highest tax credits. Either way, it's ITC tax credits or the PTCs. And for comparison, for example, we have the land and water rights on site, as I mentioned, railroads and paved roads on site. We have natural gas pipelines on site, because the current users or neighboring industries, they have a massive need of natural gas, and therefore these pipelines are existing, as well as ammonia pipelines are on site, which Kelly showed in the first slide, that there are transportation methods in the Midwest to get the ammonia moved on over long distances. So all these things needed to be in a very close proximity, and as well as a landing dock, for example, to ensure that we can also transport massive amounts of commodities over cargo barges or cargo ships. And as well, one important feature is how to get electricity on one end is to be grid connected, but that was never our direct intention, to only be using the grid connection, because you're kind of limited on what is on site when it comes to scaling up a project. And therefore, we choose our projects in a gigascale, where it's a hybrid system that has is connected to the grid with a behind of a meter component, as well as a complete off-grid DC connected system that makes it very much more easy scalable into hydrogen production. Because when it really comes to industrial needs, for millions and millions of metric tons, it's hard to achieve with a grid infrastructure that may support 3 to 4 gigawatt. But if you really want to scale up higher of that, then you have a problem to really do this. And also a DC connected project makes it way more easier and cheaper, because you're basically only producing for making green hydrogen or making green ammonia with these projects. And these are ensuring, for example, that you can have a scale up that would usually reduce your capability if you're fully grid connected, and also regulating connected with MISO or any other utility or ISO. And therefore, to make this possible, how can we take then hydrogen and transport it? We have new developments that we have 2 approved connections to the New Star pipeline, because that opens up a door or a gate to significant other project expansions, because once you use ammonia as a hydrogen carrier, you can feed in as much as you cannot do, for example, if you're just solely grid connected. And these projects will have also a complete certification for green hydrogen or green ammonia, because as Will mentioned before, how can you ensure, for example, that these molecules really come from pure green sources? And we are working here together with the Ammonia Energy Association, and I just attended last week their latest certification process for green ammonia, where with our kind of projects, when you can certify the mass production or the basic mass production of the ammonia, this kind of ammonia made from green hydrogen travels with a certificate, and this certificate can be used by any kind of a consumer worldwide. So this pipeline transportation of a hydrogen carrier such as green ammonia is really imperative to make sure that you can do this at scale, and also where you have the lowest cost of transportation. And just to give you a roundabout of an idea, several thousands of or for example 1,000 miles of transportation here through a pipeline is way cheaper than trying to transport the same amount of mass as green ammonia, for example, across country. And at this pipeline are already more than 15 off-takers of ammonia attached to. They have massive needs, and therefore the market and the transportation way is already established. So what we also focused is on a DOP, a diverse on-site production, because all these components need to be right on the location where to do it. That means renewable energies have to be produced on site. Water rights need to be on site. And then how can you ensure, for example, that there's a nearby off-taker that may be the first and initial business case to start up the process and also to scale up the project? Because once it's initiated and once you can really say there is a business case that is in place and working, then you can scale up even furthermore. And with with a diverse on-site production, there come things into play. For example, the side product. What a lot of people don't look into is oxygen from the water and from the water electrolysis. And there are already existing users and industries established to sell this kind of a commodity, as well as any other derivative that can be produced from it. And the industry is more and more looking for example, diesel exhaust fuel, and other large-scale industries have a massive need for their ammonia as a basic product for their fertilizer production, because worldwide around about 80% of the current used ammonia is used to produce fertilizer. So at this point, all these things will play a vital role to also become a part, or can become a part, for the DOG hydrogen hubs, such as Charlie mentioned before. Mach H2 and Heartland are hubs. They are right neighboring at our locations, because we are pretty much in the center of both hubs in Iowa and Missouri, and we could definitely bring a benefit to large-scale green off-takers for their products in the Midwest, and as well as combining it with carbon capture to really make a separate use case out of it in methanization of the green hydrogen with carbon capture to start a circular business model on site. And these locations are all also in a USDA eligible area where additional grants can be applied for. So I want to mention some of our partners and also research providers such as RMI, Asset Engineering, where we are working very close together with making certain layouts and systems. We have a very good knowledge and working here with the Mission Hydrogen together, as well as one of our manufacturer and supplier as a one-stop shop, ThyssenKrupp Jude and ThyssenKrupp Nucera, where they can bring in all the components and the expertise of their production facilities for green hydrogen production as well as ammonia production, because they are one of the oldest companies with that kind of an experience. And they have everything on stock, what is needed for build out a project. As well as I want to mention our Ammonia Energy Association, where we are member of and are working closely here together with Trevor Brown. So our team's motto is let's unite and propel the Midwest to the forefront of the green hydrogen innovations, and let's pave the way for substantial CO2 emission reduction and throughout our large-scale projects for industrial customers. If you have any question, please feel free, and we are happy to answer them in the question section right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gordon, for your presentation. So right now, I think we'll jump straight into answering a couple of the questions, because we don't have that much time left, but we do have time to answer 2 questions, I think. So just picking one of the main questions, I think there is one here on off-takers. So Catherine Ride asks, what industries do you see as the primary drivers of demand for hydrogen in the Midwest? Maybe, Ian, you've signaled that you'd like to answer these questions, so maybe you'd like to start.
Yeah, I'll be brief so others can chime in too. From CHF's perspective, the industries that are going to be the prime drivers are the industries that are currently using unabated hydrogen. So we've got refineries in the region, we've got steel and iron production, we've got fertilizer production, we have chemical production. All of those industries currently use hydrogen. And they're all largely well situated to kind of build out either on-site or close to their campuses. So that is where we would expect to see hydrogen to be the first mover, prime driver. Other end uses like transportation, potentially co-firing with natural gas, things like that. They'll take a little bit more time. They're less certain. Not to say that there's not an offtake there. It's just it might take a little bit of time to develop. So yeah, those are, if I were to summarize it, refineries, both biofuels and petroleum, steel and iron, and ammonia and chemicals are pretty much the ones that we would think we'd see moving first.
Thank you, Ian. I don't know whether any of Will go ahead. You've unmuted your microphone. So.
Yeah, I would just add to specify, and you alluded to this, Ian, when you mentioned ammonia production, but I would just add fertilizer production specifically makes sense to me in this region, because we know it's the center of agriculture in the United States, and that industry, just like all others, will necessarily decarbonize. So you made another good point, which is that these are like existing demand centers. for hydrogen and ammonia rather than new technologies that will or may emerge. Those are the areas that we see as obvious near-term offtake opportunities for green hydrogen and derivatives. Other industries will emerge and need that product as well, but the ones that have existing demand for hydrogen, only they currently use gray natural gas-based hydrogen, will be the ones that we want to target first.
I guess I'll just add to that the transportation centers that are already established, like in Michigan and Illinois, have already moved forward with substantial projects without any government support to date. Well, I guess that's not true. They probably got some grant money, but the point is that they've already moved forward, so I see them continuing to grow in this area.
Thank you, Charlie, Ian, and Will, for those answers. There are a couple of questions that have to do with blue hydrogen. There is one that someone asked whether the regulations on methane well, I'll read it out. So Joe asks that the EPA announced a program to hold natural gas companies accountable for all methane emissions, including those coming from natural gas extraction, fracking, and the rest of the processes. According to him, this will greatly increase the price of natural gas used to make blue hydrogen. Does that make green hydrogen more attractive? So that's I think a question for you, Charlie.
Yeah, absolutely. It does. And, one of the most interesting things about those EPA regulations was they were recommending hydrogen blending in natural gas as a way to decarbonize. And they actually pulled back on that a little, not because they don't think it's a terrific solution, but because of their concern that it's not going to get moving forward fast enough. So I think that prices are going to remain high whenever there's too much demand, right? But I don't see that impacting it so immediately that it's going to impact the price of natural gas, but it will encourage green hydrogen development.
I want to add one quick point to this,
Yeah,
which is that
go on.
we're actually, just to add on to that, we're looking at green hydrogen as a way for off-takers to actually hedge against volatile natural gas-based hydrogen. So currently, as it's been noted, gray is cheaper than low carbon alternatives, but one thing that can make green really attractive is that it won't be tied to volatile fossil-based resources. And so we can basically offer price stability for off-takers in the long run.
Thank you very much, Will. So, well, I think we only have a couple of minutes left. So, I'd like to ask you, all the panelists, if you have any parting words for the audience. So maybe let's start with Ian. So any parting words for the audience?
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what everyone else said. I mean, I'm born and raised in the Midwest. I think there's a lot of great opportunities in the Midwest, and especially for this. It's not a new industry, but an expanding industry. I think the Midwest gets a bad rap a lot of the time because of our existing grid generation and all that. But there's a lot of really cool success stories happening, and the expansion of low carbon hydrogen is one where it could be a really big like industrial game changer.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ian. Gordon, so any parting words for the audience?
Yes, for sure. And in one regard, what we have looked also into is bringing jobs into this kind of an area where usually there are no jobs, and these areas to bring really this kind of an industry that can bring the Midwest forward in the production of green hydrogen or other renewable energy combined products that is is really imperative to sustain then the Midwest from within to bring the technology, the industry, the jobs on site to make this happening. And we know there's a lot of resources in the Midwest. They can join forces together.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Charlie, what would you like to say to the audience before we close?
Just to emphasize what we were talking about before, the Midwest is going to pop with hydrogen marketplace opportunities, I think, because you've got resources and you have customers, and we're all looking for customers at the start of a new industry. So I think it's a nice place to take a look at for opportunities.
Thank you, Charlie. And then, well, finally, Will, what are your parting words for the audience?
Yeah, well, thank you everyone for being here. This was really fun. I see green hydrogen as a huge decarbonization opportunity in the Midwest and beyond for industry in particular. So it's really exciting to work on it. I think siting matters a lot, and we need to remember this. For example, putting these projects near where there's water, I think is really key. And I also think it's important for us all to be sort of clear-eyed as the industry emerges, because a lot of people are talking about hydrogen, and that's great. You know, we're all really excited to see that, but we want to make sure we're sharing realistic assessments about what it can be used for. So thanks for having me today.
Thank you very much, Will. And well, thank to all of you and to everyone who was watching us today. I think we could have actually kept on going for another hour. There is so much to cover here. And before we go, I'd like to remind you that we're actually organizing an entire event on clean hydrogen on October 9th and 10th in Chicago. So you have the details in the chat. So check it out. We'll be going really in depth on the opportunities that are arising in the Midwest and the Great Lakes area. So, well, thank you very much. I hope to see you again here soon, and have a good rest of your day. Bye.